Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Dog's scratching herself now.
Oh, well, you need to scratch yourself, did you say?
No, the dog was scratching herself.
Okay, all right, because I was going to say, if you really need to, but, it's probably, I don't know, if you started scratching yourself, like that might get us some traction on YouTube. Anyway, hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley. And there are an awful lot of film podcasts out there, hundreds, if not thousands. So anyone who's new to the show tonight might be thinking, why do I want to listen to Film Swab? What is it about Film Swab that makes it stick out from all the competition? And I'll tell you, it is my esteemed co-host, the one and only ecstatic gaucho himself, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jonathan, how are you?
Very well, thank you, David. How are you?
I'm all right, actually. I'm all right, all things considered. It's a Happy New Year. This is our first sort of proper chat, isn't it, in the new year? How's it been
in January, I suppose.
It's kind of late January, isn't it? But obviously, I think listeners probably won't be listening to this until sort of early February or later, perhaps. But yeah, so I was just about to ask you as you pick that up to drink, is this your dry January? Because
This is my dry January, and this is actually a non-alcoholic beer.
Oh, okay.
It's the beer that's actually sometimes sponsors dry January. I didn't know it had a sponsor, but apparently it does.
Oh, right.
And Lucky Saint it's called. Not bad.
Oh, okay. All right.
They do two types of non-alcoholic beer.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, on the other end, I'm not drinking non-alcoholic beer. I'm drinking I'm not having a dry January.
Good.
I'm not sure I could cope. But that's good. So how do you feel when you do the dry January? Do you feel like better in yourself, or do you like sort of just sit around craving all day a drink?
I feel good. I feel a bit more on an even keel, I suppose.
Yeah.
But apparently I heard about a study that said that when you do a dry January, you're more likely, 6 months later, you're more likely to drink less. They reckon. Okay. So it sort of breaks the habit for a bit. I mean, the habit resumes, but it's sort of slightly different. So, yeah.
Well, that's good. Well, it's good on you for having the sort of discipline to do it. I occasionally have like sort of like a dry week.
Yes.
Or, a dry kind of week-ish. And I usually find, I just tend to sleep better and I sort of generally feel better in myself, but I don't last for a whole month.
January is what a month. It just goes on and on.
It does seem to be dragging on a bit, but has your year so far been good? Has it gone to plan, or?
Well, I didn't really have any plans, but I saw some good films over sort of the Christmas break.
Yeah.
So that was nice when I had a bit more time. I really like that time of year when you can just sort of veg out, sit in front of the TV a bit more than normal maybe, and there's nowhere to go, nothing to do.
Yeah, no big commitments. Yeah, we had a nice quiet Christmas this year as well. We didn't go anywhere. We just sort of stuck around home and we did little day trips and things, but we didn't do anything in particular. So we had a nice sort of chilled out Christmas holidays.
That's nice.
And I showed the kids Spartacus for the first time.
Did they enjoy that?
Yeah, you know what? It was one of those ones where they were kind of like, oh, why do we go watch that? Like that. But then, of course, after 10, 15 minutes, they were riveted and enjoying themselves a lot, and they really liked it. We had to split out when the intermission bit comes up. We took a break for about an hour and a half and sort of had dinner and did some other stuff before we went back and watched the second half. But they really enjoyed it. That's a great segue into our theme tonight because, of course, one of the stars of Spartacus is the renowned late great actor Charles Laughton.
Yes.
And he is, in fact, one of the subjects of our show tonight because we've decided, as our first show of the new year, to talk about great British actors.
Yes, we have.
Yeah. Or I think the original remit wasn't necessarily about the UK in particular. It was just we were going to just do a show and pick a couple of really great actors that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
But we both picked British actors, so we kind of decided that's what will make the theme. Well, I'm not in any way, shape, or form into nationalism or any of that kind of stuff, as you well know. But obviously, thematically, that seemed, to gel. Yeah. And of course, we both picked male actors tonight. But of course, there are lots of really great female actors. And I suspect that this is the kind of topic that we can come and revisit in the future and maybe talk about some other great actors. Britain is quite world renowned for their acting talent, aren't they?
It's true. It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is probably one of their greatest exports, along with sort of great pop music.
Yeah.
England is quite known all over the world for their really high caliber acting talent. So I think it's a good theme for a show to pick a couple of favorites. And then what we did after we picked our respective actor, we then picked a film that we thought represented them doing what they do really well. And we tried to pick films that weren't the kind of, because it's Film Swap, and this is kind of our remit, is that we tried to pick films that are a little bit more off the beaten track, things that are not the kind of obvious, big, famous, classic films necessarily, but rather just really good performances by these actors and interesting films that we thought were worth recommending to people that they can check out. So, who wants to go first? Shall I go first?
Why not?
Okay, so we've picked two actors, and the two actors I've picked, quite possibly one of the greatest actors of the 20th century. I think, is that fair to say, Jonathan?
I think it is, yes. I mean, he has, one of his fans is Daniel Day-Lewis, who says he's one of his big inspirations.
Well, there you go. You can't get higher praise than Daniel Day-Lewis, frankly. No. He's no slouch either, is he?
Not. Exactly.
And, so I picked the great Charles Laughton.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, in the second half of the show, we're going to talk about your pick and your film. But I think we can say, because people have probably already read it in the Gumph, that your pick was someone who's still working. He's still out there and he's still going. And it's the great Michael Caine.
Yes, what an actor.
Yeah, indeed. And the film that you picked to go along tonight, he gives a particularly, I think, really good, exceptional performance.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about the Honorary Consul in the second half of the show. But first, we're going to talk about Charles Laughton, and we're going to talk about a great Hollywood classic comedy from the 1930s, from 1935, and it was called Ruggles of Red Gap. And it was directed by the great Leo McCarey, who's quite a seminal director from classic Hollywood, known mainly for his kind of screwball comedies and things, of which this one is kind of screwball-y-ish.
Yes.
And of course, he's famous for first putting Laurel and Hardy together. And he worked on... He was indeed, yeah. And he used to work on the Our Gang shorts for MGM. And he used to do a lot of really great comedies and things in the 30s. And then later on, he sort of got a little bit more serious and started doing more sort of social dramas like The Bells of St. Mary and stuff like that.
Okay.
Uh, but a really quite sort of seminal sort of figure of classic Hollywood. And this is one of his biggest hits. This was a huge sort of big blockbuster hit of 1935, starring Charles Laughton. And who else was in it? We've got Mary Boland, Charles Ruggles, which interestingly his name kind of goes with the Ruggles of Red Gap,
Yeah.
although they're absolutely not connected at all. And it was based on a best-selling novel, apparently, by someone named Leon Wilson, who I'm afraid I'm not that familiar with. So I don't know.
I'd never
How
heard
about
of him,
you?
must confess.
Well, well, I must admit, yeah, I didn't really dive in too deep into finding out about him either because I thought we'd concentrate more on the
Yes,
film side of things.
absolutely.
But Ruggles of Red Gap, I think, also ended up being a stage play first, and then was adapted into this
Yeah.
film.
Well, actually, there was 2 previous films of the book, apparently.
Oh, was there? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
One
that is
silent
news
one,
to me.
I think, and then maybe one talkie, early talkie.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah.
So it was obviously quite a popular property. And you could see why, because it's actually just a really delightful, fun, very funny story.
It
And
is.
the reason I picked this one, because with Charles Laughton, obviously the man made a lot of really classic films. And, I could have easily kind of went with, the Henry VIII or Mutiny on the Bounty or the Hunchback of Notre Dame, or I could have picked Hobson's Choice
Yeah.
or Spartacus, or Witness for the Prosecution. He's made a lot of great films, and he was a really, really amazing actor. Incredible range, and always. I think this was kind of before. What was he before? Kind of method acting. I think.
Yeah, I think so.
I think so, but he kind of, has that kind of vibe because he really sort of 100% sort of gets really dives in deep into the characters and sort of really brings them out to life. And I love Charles Laughton. I've always been a huge fan of his since I was a kid and I first
Yeah.
saw The Hunchback on television or whatever. And I think he's just an amazing talent. And I love this film, Ruggles of Red Gap, because aside from it just being very, very funny, I think it's a nice story. I mean, I think the film really was intended as kind of a sort of, a bit of a patriotic film about the
Yeah.
United States, wasn't it? We can talk a little bit about that as we go on.
Yeah.
But what I like about the story really is about just the fact that it's really about a film about someone who uh, self emancipation, isn't it? Where
Yeah.
they kind of, he's someone who's been born and lived in a kind of subjugation of a way, in a kind of servitude to sort of wealth. And
Yeah.
when he goes to America, basically because his master, as he calls him, loses him in a card game, in a poker game.
Yeah.
And so he gets taken to the United States. And there he kind of finds his own inner person
Yeah.
and sort of decides that he wants to sort of make something of himself. And
Yes.
he finds his inner sort of strength to kind of stand up for himself and become, aspire to other things, to be his own master, if you will.
Yes. Yes.
So I think it's just an absolutely terrific film. And I think Charles Laughton is very, 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 very funny. And like from even in the moments when he's not the focus of what's happening on screen, if you watch him in the background, his mannerisms and his little ticks and his little expressions and his little sort of physical comedy
Yeah.
and things that he does, he's just absolutely brilliant in this film. And I just love it.
Yeah. He's really, really funny. Uh, really accomplished sort of comic actor, basically very funny. And yeah, as you say, it's just lines, delivering lines. It's sort of his facial expressions as well, which are brilliant. His eyes and sort of his whole face, really. And yeah, I guess I'm not being a fan. I mean, I've got nothing against him. I just haven't seen many of his films. So unlike you, but yeah, I can see now why you and Daniel Day-Lewis are such big fans, because yeah, he really sort of lights up this film, doesn't he?
It does.
Was this his first film in the US?
I don't believe so, but it was probably very early on that he kind of established himself with the Corda films in the UK, the
Yeah,
sort of historical things like Henry VIII, and he played Rembrandt in a couple of
yes,
other films, and he was quite highly acclaimed. And obviously, before that, he was quite an established stage actor, as most British actors usually do come up from the
yeah,
stage background and then migrate into films later on. But then he moved over to the United States, and basically, I guess he must have essentially signed some sort of a deal with Paramount Pictures, because a lot of his early American films are with Paramount, like this one,
yeah.
and things like Island of Lost Souls, which is a very famous kind of horror film.
Okay,
And he basically, I think he preferred it in America, and I think that was one of the reasons why this story probably appealed to him, because it's a
yeah,
very similar story about somebody coming over. Uh, and I found interesting when I was kind of reading up a little bit today that he actually came from a background of work in the hotel trade,
okay.
and some of his early jobs were sort of serving people in large, expensive hotels. And
Yeah,
so a lot of that sort of plays into what happens in Ruggles of Red Gap, because he's this very sort of very traditional sort of
yeah,
butler, live-in butler.
yeah,
And he sort of basically waits on this man hand and foot. Like, he literally, at the beginning, there's a very funny bit where he's actually like stirring the man's tea for him, like putting the sugar in and stirring it for him, and then handing him the newspaper and opening it for him. And, he literally does everything for this man. Like, he literally waits on him hand and foot, morning and night, does everything for him, anticipates his every desire and his every mood and his every, and he spent his entire life in kind of servitude like this, kind of literally just walking, following this man around, sort of picking up after him and literally clothing him in the morning
yeah,
and dressing him at night, and all these things.
yeah,
So it's just extraordinary. And that's why that first opening scene's so funny, because it's all done so matter of fact, because his master just kind of very casually just kind of goes, "Oh, how do you take shocks?" And it's very funny, and then he just goes, "Oh, by the way, I kind of lost you in a poker game last night, and you're going to America today."
yeah,
And
yeah,
the look on his face is just priceless. He just is very, very funny.
yeah, yeah. It's good. I guess there's something of Jeeves and Wooster in it, isn't there? Like, basically, Jeeves is the sort of the butler who's sort of far brighter than his the man who's looking after Worcester. But it reminded me of a few films. I guess another one about butlers is The Remains of the Day,
Mm, yes.
where there's a sort of butler who's sort of repressed. I guess in The Remains of the Day, his sort of repression he doesn't go to America, let's put it like that, and sort of find a new life and sort of say goodbye to his former master, as it were. And also, there's something almost sort of like Chauncey Gardner,
Mm,
in being there, because he's like this sort of simple character as well in
mm,
some ways, isn't he? Um, and but yeah, I really like that, the way that he changes from this sort of, yeah, like a robot into a sort of yeah, free thinking and free thinking American, you could say. And there's, I guess, this is one of the highlights of the film is where he reads not reads, says the Gettysburg Address,
Yes.
and and there, I guess, Charles Laughton uses his best sort of Shakespearean acting there, doesn't he? And
He
it's
does indeed.
must be one of the best renditions of that speech around.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because I noticed on the Blu-ray that they have as one of the bonus features, they have an old 78 RPM recording, like a record that he did because of the popularity of the film. He actually recorded the Gettysburg Address as a single.
Really? Wow.
Put it out on record, and they've actually sort of transcribed this record onto the Blu-ray as a special feature.
Brilliant.
And there's also on the Blu-ray, it's interesting, they have three, not one, but three separate radio performances of Ruggles of Red Gap starring Charles Laughton.
Really?
From various points, because obviously this is in the days before home video and even before television. So, popular films would, maybe be revived in the cinema every few years or something, but you couldn't just go and grab a film off the shelf and watch it. So they used to do radio adaptations on network radio, I guess. So he did it no less than 3 times after making the film. He went in and did these sort of performances of Ruggles of Red Gap on the radio. And so it was quite a perennially popular sort of property for many, many, many years. And I think nowadays it's maybe slightly more obscure.
Right.
It's just a terrific film and just a terrific story and a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, actually, I saw I think there's 4 films of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think there's 3 silent ones. No, 5. 3 silent ones, and another talkie, as it were, another sort of made in the 50s.
Oh, okay. Well, that's amazing. I wasn't even aware of that because I suppose I like this film so much that I've never really sort of gone looking for any alternatives.
No.
But I'll have to maybe check those out. Although I can't imagine without Charles Laughton, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. Something that I thought was quite interesting, though, because like we said a few minutes ago, the film at its heart, I think the subtext of the film is really to kind of, it's kind of a little bit of a patriotic American film, kind of saying, we're the land of the free.
Yeah.
Everybody's equal. Everyone has an opportunity to come and be what they want to be and do what they want to do. And, that's fair enough as a point. And it certainly is an appealing story about this very buttoned up, traditional, sort of subjugated person who does find his own feet and become his own person when he goes to Red Gap.
Yeah.
But I found it quite interesting just immediately after the Gettysburg Address scene that you mentioned, because it's a wonderful scene where they're all sitting in a bar and talking about whether or not he should start his own restaurant and start his own business. And then his friend, the man who won him in the poker game and brought him over, kind of says, "Oh, well, what did he say in the Gettysburg Address?" And then they go around to all the people in the bar kind of saying, "Do you remember what he said in the Gettysburg Address?" Then Charles Laughton is the one who and he's the kind of fish out of water in this story, yet he knows the Gettysburg Address off by heart, and he starts to recite it, and it's quite a sort of powerful moment in the film.
Oh, very powerful.
Then immediately after, they're sitting around talking about that this woman offers him her unused property to convert to his restaurant for his idea. But then she goes on to say, well, it used to be owned by, as they say, a Chinaman, and somebody shot him. So the restaurant's up for grabs. And I was sort of like, oh, well, that's, this land of the free and the home of equality and everyone's created equal. Obviously not that,
No, no.
you know.
Well, they do also have this guy from Boston, who I guess is a sort of Boston Brahmin, and he's a dreadful snob. He's probably more snobbish even than the English character, the Lord.
Yeah, the English character isn't really snobbish at all, isn't he?
No, he's
He's
not.
actually quite a lovely bloke, really, isn't
He's
he?
a
in
very
his
nice
way.
chap. And so I feel like he's like a representative of sort of East Coast snobbery. To sort
Yeah,
of just, it's like a little gentle reminder. Nobody's perfect.
yes, that's right.
Even we can be pretty snobbish when we want.
Mm. Well, yeah, he's an interesting character as well because he's kind of the villain of the piece, isn't he? He seems
Yes.
to be, find, uh, Charles Laughton's character very deeply offensive, and he really dislikes him and tries to do everything he can to sort of sabotage him.
Yeah.
And it's quite nice. There's even like a little romance in this, isn't there? Like he meets a lovely
Yes.
lady who he gets smitten with, and that,
Yeah.
is a nice little part of the story as well. Their relationship and how it develops.
Well, also the Earl of Bernstead as well. He meets a sort of a woman
He
who
does,
sort
yeah.
of falls for as well, which is quite sweet.
Yeah, there's that terrific line when he says to her, "Oh, do you believe in love at first sight?" And she goes, "No, I don't." He goes, "Me neither. So if you don't mind, I'd like to stick around for a while." And that's a terrific line there.
Yeah.
He's got a few of them actually. He's very funny, and he's delivers all his lines very deadpan, and
Yes.
he's a terrific character. Very funny indeed.
He is very good. Yeah, it's a sort of comedy of manners in some way, isn't it? The sort of
Mm.
American way of doing, well, it's a Western American way of doing things, and the sort of British European way of doing. Yeah, because there's French in there as well, and how the sort of French react to their American ways.
Yeah, the beginning bit is set in Paris, so
Yeah.
there's a little bit of them when he goes out with his new master out on the town, and they have some misadventures and get terribly inebriated. So
Yeah,
definitely not a dry January for them.
definitely not a
And,
French Henry. No, that's a really
and
funny bit.
there's some very funny comic moments in that as well.
Yes, he does a very good. Charles Laughton also plays very good drunk
He does indeed, yeah.
as well.
He's terrific in witness for the prosecution. He's a bit like that, very mischievous and always trying to sneak cigars. And he's got like a nurse he's just come out of like from having heart surgery or something, and
Okay.
the nurse is sort of chasing him around, trying to stop him from smoking and drinking. And he comes up with all these crafty ways to try and sneak his drinks and things. So that's a terrific film as well. Charles Laughton's been in a lot of really great films, and he's a really terrific actor.
Right.
And he directed one film called The Night of the Hunter, which
Yes.
is just many people regard it as a masterpiece. It's quite a very unique sort of film noir, sort of, creepy and very
Yeah.
atmospheric and, really, really interesting film. I quite love that one as well.
Mm.
So.
Yeah, I still haven't got around to seeing it, but I do know its reputation that it's one of the best, basically.
Yeah, definitely worth seeking out. So I know you'll be watching this weekend because
Yeah. Well, he sadly died a bit young, didn't he? Well, sort of comparatively, he was 62, I think.
Yeah.
So he could have got on another.
I can't remember whether it was at heart trouble he had or many great roles, and he's left a great legacy. Over Christmas too, aside from Spartacus, my kids got another dose of him because we were driving to go and visit my partner's sister, my sister-in-law, and she. On the way there, we were just listening. We sometimes listen to audiobooks and things in the car just to amuse us on long drives, and I had found these old recordings of Christmas stories that were performed by, famous actors. And there's one there with Orson Welles and some other people. But there's one of Charles Laughton reading the Christmas section from the Pickwick Papers, a Charles Dickens novel.
Okay.
And that was quite wonderful as well. The kids didn't quite know what to make of it because, he was literally just like reading the book, like doing a dramatic reading of the book. But it was, again, just really terrific and really interesting to listen to. So I don't know if people can look that out. I can't remember how I came across it, but it was released on something, and we played it in the car to amuse ourselves.
Yeah, nothing wrong with a well-narrated book.
Yeah, he was absolutely terrific, actually. He reminds me of kind of the modern-day equivalent of like someone like Stephen Fry, who does a lot of audio books and things as well, doesn't he? And he's quite good at sort of dramatizing the different characters and things like that.
Yeah, we were listening to, thinking of narration, the first Just William book, narrated by Martin Jarvis. And I guess it had a sort of similar sort of humor. Really, really funny. I mean, and he's just an absolutely amazing narrator. And he's performed as Jeeves, funny enough, Martin Jarvis.
Okay.
Okay. There you go.
Well, definitely. Was there anything else you wanted to say about Ruggles?
No, I guess it's culture clash, a sort of comedy of manners. I just wrote down, and it's got a good dialogue as well. I wrote down North America. It's quite an untamed country, so I think that might be one of the lines, which is a sort of funny way of phrasing it.
Yeah, there are many, many great little sort of little bits of dialogue and stuff. It's a very funny film. And as we were saying at the beginning, Charles Laughton, even when he's not saying anything, just the physical comedy and and all the mannerisms and stuff, he's just absolutely priceless. One of the things I picked up on, which I thought was quite interesting, was again on the Blu-ray, there was a special feature. Simon Cowell, who's a well-known British actor, and he's also quite an accomplished biographer. He's written some really good biographies of Orson Welles, and a few others. And I think he's also written a book about Charles Laughton.
Oh, I see.
And interestingly enough, so they interview him as a little special feature on the disc, and he actually doesn't rate Ruggles very much. He's a bit sort of, I wouldn't say disparaging, but he sort of definitely puts it forth as a sort of a minor sort of work of Charles Laughton. And but he did tell an interesting story. I guess what I should say first of that is I completely disagree with him on that. As much as respect for the man as I have, I disagree with his take on Ruggles of Red Gap. But, Simon, you're absolutely welcome to come on the show and talk with us sometime. And you can, defend your position on that. I'd be happy to talk with you. I think that'd be a really interesting conversation. But he did mention, interestingly, that Ruggles of Red Gap was filmed just immediately after Charles Laughton had some health issues. He just had some surgery, something about a hernia, some sort of problem with his back area.
Okay.
And so he had some quite serious sort of health issues that he was just kind of recovering from prior to making this film. So that he reckoned that may have accounted for some of his funny mannerisms and things like that. But I mean, there may be something to that, but I think whether or not that's the case or not, he's actually very funny, and a lot of his, the sort of the physical humor and things are very. And I think at the time that he did mention too, that at the time this film came out, Charles Laughton was predominantly known for more serious roles and not so much as a comic actor. So for a lot of people, this would have been sort of a bit of an eye opener seeing Charles Laughton in a performance like this, in a more sort of comedy. Sort of,
It wasn't The Private Life of Henry VIII. Is that sort of a comedy? Somewhat.
Yeah, I think you could make that argument. I mean, I don't think it's really so much a comedy, but there's some
It's light-hearted.
Yeah, it's kind of, there's kind of that kind of, there's some tongue-in-cheek moments and things in it. But that's a great film, definitely worth seeking out as well if you haven't seen it.
No, I haven't. No.
Yeah.
That was one of the biggest sort of British films of the 30s, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, definitely, and absolutely worth checking out. There's a great DVD set from in their clip series that collects all the. Sorry, I have it. I don't quite have it to hand, but it collects all the Alexander Korda sort of historical,
Okay.
And several of them, if not all of them, starred Charles Laughton. Definitely, that's worth picking up if you can still. I'm not sure if that's still going because they don't really do the Eclipse series anymore, and I don't know if those are all still available or not. But they're definitely that's definitely a really good set. That's worth checking out.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I think shall we? I don't know unless there's anything else you wanted to say about.
No, I see that those Alexander Korda films are actually out of print. The Criterion box set.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a shame. But hopefully, I mean, those films are fairly sort of, they're quite classic films, so they might be available on Prime or something like that. If people search around for them, then I would imagine they can't be too hard to come by. They might be on YouTube or something. So anyway, definitely search those out, folks, as well. Anyway, I'll show you again. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure this is out of print now as well, but I'll just show the Masters of Cinema Blu-ray.
Okay.
Ruggles of Red Gap. It's actually a dual format. It's got a Blu-ray and a DVD copy of the film in it.
No, that's good.
And as well as a really lovely booklet with all kinds of interesting facts and factoids about the film, about Charles Laughton. And as I mentioned, it's got that recording of the Gettysburg Address that he released commercially in the 30s.
Yes.
And it's got 3 separate radio adaptations of Ruggles of Red Gap that starred Charles Laughton that he did for American radio. And it's got that interview with Simon Cowell on it as well.
Not
kind of a
Simon Callow.
Simon Callow, yeah, am I saying it
Simon Cowell is the one who does X Factor.
Oh yeah, sorry. Sorry, Simon. Apologies for that. I'm getting you mixed up with the guy who does Pop Idol or whatever. Definitely, it's certainly a totally different kettle of fish altogether. But anyway, it's a good Blu-ray. If you can still find a copy of that's definitely.
I streamed it. You can watch it on. I watched it on Amazon Prime. I think you watch it on YouTube, Google Play, and Apple TV in the UK. So 4 different services allow you to stream it.
Oh, brilliant! Okay. Yeah, Universal kind of controls the Paramount Pictures sort of pre-1948 or something Paramount catalog. So all of those early Charles Laughton films fall under the Universal banner now. So hopefully they've got most of them up on the available on streaming. So yeah, definitely folks go and search it out because it's a terrific film in nice evenings entertainment or morning or sort of early afternoon or whenever you sit down to watch a film. And it's not too long either. It's only like an hour and a half. And it is very entertaining, very funny, very enjoyable film. So definitely search it out.
Both films are sort of fairly nicely shortish. And I think the next.
That's right. Both our films tonight are roughly the same length. They're about spot on an hour and a half long. Yeah. And so that's good, like for, sort of like people like us, because, I'm getting older now, so I struggle to stay up late and sort of concentrate on anything for any length of time. But if it's a longer film, I quite often now split them up over 2 nights or whatever, because I can't quite do it.
Yeah.
But anyway, some people out there who are still a bit younger and have a bit more stamina might be able to watch longer films.
Also a bit more time.
Yeah, time's nice. But anyway, they're both great films. And when we come back, we're going to have our usual little short break, and then Jonathan and I are going to come back with the second of our great British actors double bill. And we're
Yes.
going to be talking about a completely different type of film. We're going
Completely.
to go from 1930s screwball American comedy to a British political thriller from the early 80s.
Yeah. Still in
So
not America, but in the Americas.
the Americas, yeah. But it's an American film. Let's put it that way.
Yes, yes.
But you're right, it's not set in America.
Yeah.
But there you go.
There you go.
So, folks, we're just going to take a second's break. For you, it literally will be just a few seconds. So don't go anywhere because we're going to be right back. And then we're going to talk about our second film tonight, which is called The Honorary Consul.
Consul.
Council. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I'll
CON.
tell you what, shall I, because I'm, from my North American background, I shall instead refer to it as by its American title, which is the Beyond the Limit, which is totally bizarre title. But anyway, we'll talk about that more in depth in a moment. So we'll be right back, folks. Stay tuned.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, and on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the Podcast.
And we're back. Welcome back, listeners. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Hi.
Hello. We are tonight talking about great British actors.
Yeah.
And we've just spent some time talking about Charles Laughton. And now I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed co-host, who's going to tell us a little bit about his choice of actor and film.
Yeah.
Jonathan, take it away.
So my actor is Michael Caine. So I suppose nowadays he's much better known than old Charles Laughton because he's still working, or I think he may have retired last year, but basically he's been working until very recently, including in huge films, because he's one of his fans is Christopher Nolan. And so he's used him in a number of his films, especially the Batman films. So sort of younger people will be acquainted with him through that, as it were. But, he's got an incredibly long career from the sort of 60s up until, the 20s, basically. But unlike Charles Laughton, he didn't have so much of a theatre career. He was much more of a pure sort of film actor. But he's really one of the sort of great actors, British actors, film actors of the second half of the 20th century. He's been in loads of great British films, Hollywood films, but he's also, interestingly enough, because he sort of wasn't afraid to not turn down films. So he did a lot of sort of rubbish as well. I think that's
he's been very prolific.
He's been very prolific.
Aside from being in a lot of great films, he's been in a lot of
stinkers.
But
it doesn't matter, because I'm sure those stinkers aren't quite as stinky as they would have been without him.
Exactly. I have to say Michael Caine is, along with, because someone else who I think is quite like that too, is Denzel Washington. Is someone who, even when they're in sort of mediocre films or outright sort of rubbish films,
right,
they somehow elevate it a bit, don't they? Like them being there, their presence and their talent and their sort of charisma, they manage to take something that would otherwise, be probably a complete waste of time, and they bring it up a notch, don't they?
They do.
And make it worth watching.
Yeah, Denzel Washington, another terrific talent as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And the thing about Michael Caine is you sort of watch him and you think, what is it? It's sort of, he's such a sort of subtle actor in a way. What is it that makes a great actor. And it's a sort of mystery, really, isn't it? And watching him, you really feel that mystery quite palpably. And so, yeah, that's Michael Caine, we all know. And this is probably not one of his best-known films, but I still think he's really good. And it actually has a lot of talent involved. So it's directed by John Mackenzie, who did The Long Good Friday. That's his sort of best-known film, with Bob Hoskins famously.
And one we've talked about on a previous episode, wasn't it? When we
yes.
talked about A Star is Born, that was Bob Hoskins' first big sort of breakthrough film. And
Exactly.
Bob Hoskins is in this film as well, isn't he?
He
Although
is.
he plays more of a supporting role.
Yeah, I think John Mackenzie made another film with Bob Hoskins. Definitely made one or two more with Michael Caine. It's got Richard Gere in it as well.
Yes.
One of his sort of earlier roles, I guess.
Yeah, this is quite around when Richard Gere was sort of on the rise. He was kind of at the height of his sort of fame, sort of this period. This would be just off the back of things like American Gigolo and what's the kind of remake of
Yanks?
Breathless that he did.
Right, yeah.
Yanks and all that kind of stuff.
Those ones. Yeah. And here he plays an English character.
Yeah.
Which is sort of...
Yeah, which he struggles a bit with the accent, I think.
He does. I mean, I don't think he really had to do an English accent, because this was somebody who was who lived, I think, all their life in South America. So it's not like they, anyway, he could have kept his American accent. That's what I mean.
Probably. I don't think anyone would have held it against him. No.
I don't think so. And it also has Elpidia Carrillo, who is the Mexican actress, I think is well known in Mexico.
Yeah. She's a very, very strikingly pretty young lady, isn't she?
She is.
I recently just saw her in, I watched Oliver Stone's Salvador.
Oh, yes.
With James Woods, and she plays kind of the girlfriend in that one as well.
Right.
And so she's and that film is roughly around the same time that this film came out. So
right, yeah.
So she was obviously, sort of doing lots of stuff around this time. But
yes.
Very good actress, and like I say, very striking looking lady as well.
Very much, yeah. And it's based on a novel. It came out in 1983. It was based on a novel from 10 years earlier, 1973, called the same name, Honorary Consul by Graham Greene, the great Graham Greene. So the dialogue's terrific. But the screenplay was actually adapted by Christopher Hampton, and the great British sort of screenwriter, who's best known for the Dangerous Liaisons. But he also wrote the screenplay for Atonement and numerous other sort of plays and films and things like that. So it's got a lot of talent involved there, even though it's not particularly well known. What did you think of it?
Well, I was saying to you before, this film I hadn't seen it before. I sort of vaguely remember it when it kind of came out.
Yeah.
Sort of what? When was it? 83? 80? What did you say it was?
It was 83, yeah.
83, yeah. But for some reason, I guess I'd never seen it before. And I thought it was an interesting little film. I mean, I think we'd be disingenuous if we said that it was like any kind of masterpiece or anything, because I don't think it is. But it's a good, solid political thriller, and all the performances are really good in it, and especially Michael Caine, because I think he very much, just like we were just saying about how he is really good in this. Like he really creates this kind of slightly kind of pathetic character, isn't he? He's not by any stretch is he glamorous. He's a very flawed character. He's sort of given up on himself. He's a drunk, and he's in this sort of position where. Do you want to explain to people what an honorary consul actually is, so that people would understand that?
From what I gather, basically, a consul is like representative of your sort of foreign government in a locality, town. Yeah. So he's a sort of British businessman who lives in a sort of smallish or medium-sized town in Argentina, and he's not the consul. He's not the actual consul. He's the honorary consul, which
Yeah.
is, I mean, a consul's a fairly minor position, relatively
Yeah.
minor, but an honorary
And
consul.
this is where they just give it to someone who just happens to be there, who
Exactly.
can sort of fulfill that role, but they're not sort of official. They're just kind of there as an honorary one, like just sort of saying, "Oh, you can do it."
Yeah.
Because you're there. You
Yeah.
happen to. It means we don't have to put a real one here.
Exactly. He probably does about sort of 2 afternoons work a month, I would imagine, in his consul job.
There's not a lot of demand, and it's probably pretty easygoing. And he's kind of there anyway, and presumably they get paid for it. I would have thought. Do they?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're, it's just a bit, sort of like a side hustle.
Yeah, pay for a few bottles of whiskey. I suppose. And that's his sort of life. Is basically, I mean, I guess he has a sort of business of some sort, but he seems like he drinks quite a lot, and he has this sort of. He's in a relationship with this young woman from the town, and then basically Richard Gere, who's also British, and he sort of somehow their lives collide, and Richard Gere becomes rather smitten with the girlfriend,
with the wife. Yeah,
the wife. Is she a wife? Yeah, she's just got married.
Yeah, Michael Caine marries her, and I guess the other sort of element of that is that this girl, up until she marries Michael Caine, she's actually been working in a local brothel, which they both sort of frequent, and sort of all these sort of more sort of wealthy elite sort of foreigners who live in the city kind of go there for their amusements. And Richard Gere becomes smitten with this girl. And then later it transpires that she's actually been taken out of the brothel by Michael Caine, and he's married her.
Yeah.
So, but then they start an affair. And then the film gets into, because Richard Gere has some old friends who are now sort of political activists.
Yes.
And they hatch a plan to kidnap a local American sort of who is he, like a politician or some sort of representative of the American government who's there, and but it all goes horribly wrong, and they kidnap Michael Caine by mistake. Basically, that's kind of the plot of the film. So Richard Gere ends up being sort of embroiled in this kidnapping of his mate, basically, and the husband of this woman he's having an affair with.
Yeah. And the funny thing about it is that the kidnappers think that because he's a British honorary consul, he must be worth something to the British.
Yes.
But they're basically, sorry, guys.
Yeah, nobody cares.
That's completely inconsequential. And it's a bit like the Our Man in Havana, which is a sort of this British Hoover or vacuum cleaner salesman gets somehow roped into spying for MI6 in sort of Batista days in Cuba, I think. And but basically he's just a sort of nobody as well. And so he sends the blueprints of Hoover or vacuum cleaners to MI6 as making out that they're sort of secret weapons in the jungle.
Yeah. It's just I love Our Man in Havana. That's a terrific film. And isn't that based on a Graham Greene story?
Yes, that's a Graham Greene novel. So, and that's sort of part of Graham Greene's thing is the sort of sordid and the sort of absurd side of espionage, basically, and politics. The Michael Caine and Christopher Hampton were both in the Quiet American, which is similar, another Graham Greene adaptation set in Vietnam in the sort of 50s. And with a sort of pretty similar plot, actually. With sort of two men and their sort of younger woman that they're both interested in.
Yeah, the little love triangle.
Love triangle.
But to go back to this one, he's kidnapped and he's being held in this little sort of rundown shack in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Michael Caine, this is where you really see his strength as an actor, because he really humanizes this guy. And
Yeah.
I think, to me, it was the strongest element of the film, was this
Yeah.
character and this in his performance, because I think he really makes you, empathize with this guy. And you can see his hopelessness, because he's someone who's already kind of given up on himself, and he's kind of a bit of a lush, and he's very sort of, cynical.
Yeah.
And then when he gets in this situation, and he kind of realizes right away that they're not going to come for me, they're not going to help me, then this isn't going to go well. Basically, I'm a dead man.
Yeah.
I'm screwed, basically.
Yeah.
And he really makes you feel that pity for this guy, because he's kind of sitting there going, "Oh man, I'm screwed, man. I'm done." So he's just absolutely terrific in this film,
Yes, he
as
is.
usual. Yeah,
There's a really good bit where he's sort of like lying on his back in that shack in this sort of really crummy bed, and he can sort of overhear the people next door. And yeah, terrific acting there.
yeah, yeah. So it's a terrific story. What do you make of this title? Because we alluded to this just before the break, but in America, I guess because they were concerned that people might not understand the title, they decided to change it. And that's
Mm.
fair enough. I mean, that happens all the time, that
Yeah,
films, get released under different titles in different territories. That's
yeah.
not anything out of the ordinary. But
No.
I am baffled by the choice of title. They called it Beyond the Limit.
What limit?
And I absolutely, for the life of me, can't work out what is that in reference to within the story?
Yeah,
What does that have to do with it?
it's almost as if they just picked something out of the air. Really, they thought, what should we call it? Wow, that'll do.
Well, if you look at because I have here on my computer screen, I have the one sheet poster for the American release,
Oh yeah,
Beyond the Limit. And it does have a picture of Richard Gere with his shirt off,
yes,
and this beautiful woman who we talked about, how do you say her name? Alpedia Carrillo. So, it's kind of like looking like they're making it like it's kind of sexy, like a sexy.
yeah,
And it's called Beyond the Limit, and they
yeah.
show here's Richard Gere
That's what it
lying
is.
back in
That's what
bed
it's
with his
referring
shirt
to.
off, and a sexy woman lowering himself into his arms. And you kind of think maybe that's what maybe they didn't have a lot of faith in the film, so they kind of thought, oh, let's play up because Richard Gere, he'd been in American Gigolo, and like I said, he'd been in that kind of sexy remake of Breathless.
Yeah,
And he kind of, at that time, he was a young, good looking guy, and
yeah.
fit and everything. So I guess they maybe decided to play up that angle of that it was a kind of a sexy Richard Gere film.
Well, they're still doing that because I watched it on Prime, and
Oh, okay.
once I'd finished, it comes up with a sort of, if you like that, you might like these.
Yeah.
But they weren't sort of Graham Greene adaptations or Christopher Hampton screenplays or Richard Gere films or Michael Caine films or anything like that. They were all these really sort of cheap, sort of erotic, sort of thrillers or erotic films, which I'd
Right.
never heard of. No well-known
Okay.
titles, nothing interesting at all about them. But that metadata obviously attached
Yeah.
to this film
Oh,
is
but that was what it was kind of in. That was the wheelhouse that it was going in. Well, that's interesting. I mean, because the film does have a few sort of saucy moments in it, and
it does, yeah,
like that, but it isn't really like that isn't kind of what the film is about, and that's not
no,
what it's kind of.
it's definitely not. It's definitely
It's
not.
more of a political thriller and sort of a human drama. And
Exactly.
yeah, so it is kind of funny, I guess. Maybe just from a marketing point of view, I guess they weren't sure what to do with it, so they kind of decided to play up that angle, I suppose. Fair enough,
Yeah,
I suppose. But because I'm not a marketing person, so I guess.
yeah.
Um, but it obviously didn't do the film any favors, because it didn't seem, although it wasn't like an outright sort of complete bomb or anything, it didn't really make much of an impact commercially at the time.
No.
And it is a film that I think subsequently does. I think it's become relatively obscure. I think, is that
Yeah.
fair to say? Because like I said, when you suggested it as your pick, I was kind of like, oh, okay. I'm not sure I've seen that one.
Yeah.
And I hadn't.
I watched it long time ago, maybe in the 80s or the 90s, and maybe in the 80s I was at school, or maybe I saw it when I was at school, or maybe in the 90s as sort of late night TV. But I do remember enjoying it, and because I'd sort of read a few Graham Greene books, and but then when I was thinking which Michael Caine film should I choose, and I sort of found a list of his sort of 80 best films or something kind of like that. And this was sort of near the top. And I just wanted one that was not an obvious pick. So
yeah, definitely.
This is.
I mean, yeah, we could have talked about any number of his films. We could have talked about
Get Carter.
Yeah, Get Carter definitely is a brilliant film. And no, I was thinking of things like Elfie and Italian Job and all those kind of, those sort of really, when he was at kind of his peak. Yeah, Get Carter definitely is a great film.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like, obviously, we want to try and shine some light on some more obscure things and sort of draw people's attention.
Michael Caine when he's weary. And this is...
but he's definitely very world weary here, just very cynical and sort of given up.
Isn't he world weary in Hannah and Her Sisters as well?
That's a good film as well. Yeah. Well, I mean, Michael Caine's had a very prolific career, and he's been in so many films, good and bad. There's so much to choose from that you just have to kind of just pick something. And I think he made a great choice because I'd not seen it before, so I found it really interesting. And like we said, it's not like I wouldn't say that this is a really great film, but it's actually a good, solid film. It's a good story.
Yeah.
It's got really good performances. Bob Hoskins, always, great. And this, again, would have been fairly early in his, rise to prominence.
Yep.
So,
yep.
And he's a good, solid supporting player in this, and an interesting character because he's kind of he's the policeman, isn't he, who's investigating the kidnapping, and he's a friend of Richard Gere's, and he's sort of, you don't know, does he know or doesn't he know, and what does he know and what doesn't he know, and how's he gonna, so he's an interesting kind of quite pivotal character in the film. And I think it's a really solid, good film. It's it's definitely worth a watch. Definitely interesting, and so I think it was a really good pick.
Good, thank you. Yeah, well, I also another actor has on it, British actor Geoffrey Palmer, who's the ambassador when Richard Gere goes down to see him, but I love Geoffrey Palmer. I mean, it's sort of if you're not haven't watched any British TV from the sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, you wouldn't really know who he is, but he's a terrific sort of character actor.
Yeah, and that's a good scene actually as well. That where they kind of very much bring home that point of like, this guy, because he goes there as his friend and says, "Hey, what are we going to do to help him?"
Yeah,
and they're just kind of like, "Well, to be honest, the Americans don't care, and we're not really that fussed about him either." And what he says, that really great line where he kind of says, if he was a really rich industrialist or whatever, then they would probably sit up and take more notice. But this guy, they're just sort of like not really that fussed.
Yeah,
and it does kind of make you sort of wonder, because like if I was ever abroad and something happened to me, you just kind of think, no one would really be that bothered about going to a lot of trouble to help me.
No.
So, it's kind of puts that into perspective for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I quite enjoyed the film. And we were mentioning, because John Mackenzie, as you said, he directed The Long Good Friday,
Yes.
and we exchanged some messages earlier. Was it today or yesterday? Where I said to you, "Is this the first time that we've covered a particular director more than once?"
Right.
Because it was kind of inadvertent, because we didn't kind of realize that.
No, I didn't.
I didn't pick up on that until I was reading up on the film a bit more, and then I went, "Oh yeah, this is the guy who did Long Good Friday."
Right.
But it turns out that he now, John Mackenzie, and the late, unfortunately now late, great David Lynch are the
Yeah.
only two directors so far within the podcast that we've covered more than one of their films.
Mm.
So that's kind of quite interesting, because neither one of these directors were particularly prolific either. But, they only made about kind of a dozen films each. And
Yes. Well,
yeah,
interesting.
we've covered them twice on the
Yeah,
show.
it's funny, isn't it? Interestingly, they say that old John Mackenzie, his mentor when he started out in TV in the 60s was Ken Loach, which is interesting. So he made some films with Ken Loach. Yeah, he was I think, the assistant director for Up the Junction and Cathy Come Home.
Well, there you go. So it's definitely a good company.
Yes, absolutely.
Definitely a good, solid storyteller as well.
Yeah.
I mean, this film isn't particularly flashy, sort of cinematically or anything, but it's photographed really well. And it's just a good, solid story, well told. I mean, apparently, from what I understand, it seems, I haven't read the book either, but apparently the film is very faithful to the book. Like, it kind of covers the the story. They didn't usually when they make films of books, they tend to chop and change it a lot and sort of change things around sometimes, but this apparently is very faithful to the novel.
Okay.
So there you go.
Yeah. Well, I see that apparently Graham Greene didn't like the film because he said, "I don't want to see Richard Gere undressing." And he said Richard Gere was completely and utterly miscast. But, he was a grumpy old so-and-so, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, from what I understand, he didn't like most of the films based on his, and there's been some really great films based on his novels, so he's obviously quite fussy. But I mean, that's understandable. If you're a writer and you write something, you're never going to be happy with what somebody else does with your stuff. So I think that's pretty commonplace, that writers don't end up being unhappy with films
That's true.
based on their work. And I don't think he's being fair to Richard Gere, because although, I mean, I guess I don't really associate Richard Gere as being a really great actor. At the same time, he's all right in this. I don't think it's fair to say he's miscast. Maybe somebody else might have been a bit more interesting. But
in some ways, he's actually well cast because he's quite good at playing sort of shadow characters.
Yeah, exactly. And he's kind of ambiguous, like morally, because he's not like, he makes a lot of sort of questionable choices. And that's what one of the interesting dynamics in the film is, that on the one hand, because there's another sort of plot element about his father who became sort of involved with these, and he's all very morally kind of sort of ambiguous, isn't he, about the way he looks at things and the way he looks at the relationship. He starts this affair with his friend's wife, but he doesn't really seem to be that fussed about her either. He's just kind of, so he isn't necessarily like a nice guy.
No.
And you're right. And in a lot of films around this time, he kind of plays those kind of characters, doesn't he? Sort of, that was his kind of stock in trade.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I mean, I didn't mind him in this. I don't mind Richard Gere. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say I would join his fan club or anything, but at the same time, I don't mind him. I think he's been in some good films. I just recently rewatched Days of Heaven, which is a really, really great film. And he's very good in that. And, so Graham, lay off him. Give Richard Gere a break. He's all right.
Yeah. Exactly. Another thing I noticed actually that the reason they didn't call it Honorary Consul in the States is, according to Michael Caine, they thought nobody in America would know what an Honorary Consul was, which was what we sort of assumed.
Yeah, I suppose so, because I didn't really. I guess I had to sort of think about it, if you know what I mean. Like I sort of looked at, what does that mean? Because I know what a consul is. What does that mean, honorary consul? And then you kind of just assume the rest, that it's obviously some sort of kind of bestowed title, but I didn't really, so I can imagine that.
Yeah.
I can imagine, like, I can understand why they maybe thought that it would be a good idea to change the title. But at the same time, I guess I don't agree with the idea of pandering either. Like, I think it wouldn't hurt to put the film out with that title and then let people kind of go. If you have a major film release with Richard Gere, who at the time was a pretty high profile star, and Michael Caine as well.
Yeah.
Put the film out with the proper title and let people ask that question. Well, what is that? What does that mean?
Yeah.
They could look it up, rather than pander and kind of go, oh, they might not know what it means. So let's
they can look it up now. They could look it up on Wikipedia.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, I think you shouldn't be afraid to challenge people a little bit.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
Because it's not bad to be challenged sometimes, is it?
No.
Just so, But anyway, on that note, folks, go and look out this film because it's worth a watch. Like it's not Citizen Kane. It's not even The Long Good Friday, I would say, but it's a good, solid, entertaining film, and I think it's worth an evening's viewing.
Definitely. Yeah.
And you were like me, because I watch it on Prime Video as well, where it's currently available as part of the subscription package. You can watch the film.
Yes.
But that tends to chop and change, so it may not. I mean, we're recording this in the last week of January 2025. So at the moment, it is available on Prime to watch as part of the subscription package, but it may not be there 3 months from now, or, next year or whatever. So folks, go and check it out as soon as you can, because it's good.
You can also watch it on Apple TV, where you have to pay for it, but then you don't get those adverts.
Yeah, the whole adverts on Amazon, and Disney's doing that now as well, and it's like, man, bad news.
Yeah,
that would be me gone, because I don't paying a subscription fee and having to watch adverts. You can't kind of have your cake and eat it too. It's one or the other. Yeah, so make up your mind and do one or the other. But I'm not going to pay money to watch adverts. That's not happening. So it'll be bye-bye Amazon very soon if you keep it up. But anyway, on that note, go and check out this film and Ruggles of Red Gap as well, because they're both really terrific films.
Oh, yes, another interesting thing about it. Sorry, before I forget about the Honorary Consul.
That's right.
Another bit of sort of big talent involved. So it has old theme musics written by Paul McCartney, no less.
Oh yeah, I noticed that.
And then the music is actually done by John Williams, the great, performed by John Williams. That's a guitarist, not the film composer, actually. But Paul McCartney involved too. So that's a lot of talent on this film.
It was. There's quite a lot of talent in front of and behind the camera. So, so just on that basis, it's worth a look. Yeah, it's a good, solid film. So check it out. But anyway, it was good to talk to you, Jonathan. Happy New Year and all that again. And folks, we will be back soon with another episode. We're actually in the process of organizing a couple of really interesting guests. Yes. So I think, folks, now is a really great time to hit that follow button or hit that subscribe button, depending on where you consume the podcast, then you'll be the first to hear about it when a new episode drops,
Yes.
which should be very, very soon. So until then, folks, take care of yourself. Watch these films and watch more great films. And by all means, drop us a line. Let us know what you think about Richard Gere and John Mackenzie and Michael Caine and Charles Laughton. And let us know who your favorite British actors are. There's a lot of great ones out there. And we might revisit this subject again. And maybe next time we'll do, like another country, and we'll pick a couple of really great actors from there.
Sounds good.
And all that kind of stuff. So let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you soon.
Brilliant.
Take care, folks.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show.
Oh, the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.